Hello, we are the Academic Support Services team here in the UNT Learning Center. The Learning Center is here to support you with all your academic needs, with multiple workshops and support services, like academic coaching, supplemental instruction, and tutoring. In this presentation, you'll get a taste of one of our academic support services as we explore more effective reading strategies. Let's get started. First, choose your text. Make sure you're in the right headspace for that reading. For example, if you're not in the right headspace for reading chemistry, try a different class. Before you dive in, take a moment to consider how the reading is related to the course and whether it aligns with the content being discussed in class. Next, find a space to do your reading that is quiet and has minimal distractions. Some people like to go to places like Starbucks to read, while others find that it's easier to stay focused in a library or at home. Make sure you have all the things you need without your distractions. This could include water, snacks, or something to take notes or annotate the reading with. Lastly, read on your schedule. If you're not typically a night owl and go to bed at 8 p.m., it might not be helpful to start reading a chemistry book at 12 a.m. Just figure out a schedule that works for you. Here are a few things you could keep in mind about the reading process. Read actively. Make sure you comprehend the material. Achieve a deep level of processing. Avoid any bad habits. Change your reading rates and use the PQRST method. Firstly, make sure you read actively during a time when you aren't distracted and are able to focus on the material. If you find that you're not retaining any of the information, it might be best to either take a break or try reading another time. You can read actively by annotating, summarizing, and taking note of the questions that you have while you're reading. Annotating can be very helpful for some people. Do so in a way that works best for you. This can include highlighting, taking notes, or using sticky notes to mark important areas of your reading that you may want to come back to or review. One important suggestion is to annotate in the moment while you're reading so that you don't have to try and remember what was important and potentially miss some key concepts. When you're reading, also take the time to occasionally stop and summarize what you've read. This can be done by writing a summary or just summarizing in your mind or aloud. Lastly, make a note of any questions that come up while you're doing your readings so that you can try to answer them later or mention them to your instructor. The ultimate goal of reading is to comprehend the material you're reading. One way to comprehend what you're reading is to consider any questions that you have while you're reading. You may not always have an immediate answer, but they can help keep you accountable. Some questions to think about are, what is the genre that I'm reading? What is the main point of this section? And how is it related to the overarching point of the reading? And what definitions or explanations are given while I'm reading? Try to only read the chapter once, unless you're struggling to understand it. You can always reread later, but try to set a goal to only read one chapter, unless you really need it again to fully understand what it says. You want to start processing information deeply as soon as possible, because it will help you retain the information. The first level of processing is shallow processing. An example of shallow processing is noting a fact, but not thinking any deeper about it or making any connections, such as if I'm presenting to a class and I see someone wearing a pink jacket. If I first just notice the jacket and don't have any other thoughts, in a few seconds I'll probably forget about the pink jacket. However, if I see a jacket and then think, oh, that reminds me of my best friend's jacket, I'm making deeper connections to the observation, which moves it to intermediate processing level, and it goes into my short-term memory. The third level of processing is deep processing, which enables the information to proceed into a long-term memory. An example of that would be seeing the jacket, thinking about how it reminds me of my best friend's jacket, and then remembering that my friend lost that jacket and how much she would like another one. These lines are thoughts of more connected to something that is relevant to me. A greater connection would be created if I thought how my friend might prefer another color jacket, or thinking that I should ask the person where they got it from. Some reading habits that you might want to try and avoid if you're having difficulty comprehending what you're reading include sub-vocalization, frequently rereading, reading at one speed, and reading when you're tired. Sub-vocalization involves mouthing each word when you're reading. If you do this and it works for you, great, keep it up. However, if you're having difficulty understanding the information that you're reading, you may try to stop doing this until you better understand the section that you're reading. The reason why this is suggested is because when you're mouthing each word, sometimes your brain focuses on each individual word as a new piece of information, and this can slow down our processing. Another habit to avoid is always rereading. If you're reading something and you realize that you weren't paying attention while reading a paragraph or two, you don't need to immediately go back and reread it. If you missed any major concepts, then it might be helpful to reread that section. But however, if you missed something small, you can keep reading and try to use context clues to get the full picture. However, if you are feeling totally lost, you can definitely go back and reread. Also, try reading at different rates. You can usually read material that is familiar to you at a rate faster than information that is brand new. And we'll talk about the different reading rates here on the next slide. The last habit that you want to avoid while reading is tired. For some people, it can be difficult to retain information when we're tired. So it can be more helpful to prioritize reading when you're alert so you're able to absorb that information easier and read at a faster speed than when you're tired. As I mentioned in the previous slide, there are different types of reading rates. Sometimes a professor will tell you it's important to read certain chapters in certain ways, so you can save some time when they tell you there is a chapter where you can skim or scan the content. One thing to understand is the difference between scanning and skimming. Scanning is the fastest type of reading and involves searching through an entire body of text for key terms such as facts, dates, numbers, or graphics. And when scanning, we usually read about 1,000 to 1,700 words per minute. Now, skimming involves reading the first and last sentence of each paragraph and involves reading about 900 to 1,500 words per minute. Both reading rates are much faster than how you typically read, but neither give you the whole picture, so make sure you don't rely on it. The third type of reading is speed reading. This involves reading every word quickly, mostly utilizing groupings. When speed reading, we usually read about 500 to 900 words per minute. Now, comfortable reading includes reading 200 to 400 words per minute, and analytical reading is the slowest type of reading with about 200 words per minute. Analytical reading is used when we're reading difficult material and we need to read slower to help us comprehend what we're reading. Now we'll talk about the PQRST method, which is 5 steps to prepare for textbook reading. First, preview the section or chapter. Read the introduction and conclusion, any bold headings or vocabulary terms. Second, pose questions to yourself about what you're reading based off what you just learned from your preview. Next, read the text with a deep level of processing. After you've read a section, summarize it to yourself in writing or aloud. Finally, test yourself to check for understanding before you move on. It may take slightly longer while you're getting used to it, but it will help you retain way more information. The close reading method is ideal for reading texts like essays or journal articles. You can start by looking into an author's background and career. This can help you make connections faster because you'll have a sense of their work. When reading essays or articles, be sure to actively annotate, since it doesn't have a quick review at the end like a traditional textbook. If you can also identify any patterns or contradictions in the reading, this is often a sign of greater points being made. And try to actively ask yourself questions and try to answer them within the text. Reading online isn't too different from reading a physical copy, but there are some additional things to take into consideration. First, synthesize what you've read. When reading online, you're much more likely to have a greater base to read from, and it might start to look like too much too fast. Don't get click happy and click on every link you see. That's how we end up distracted by less reliable resources, or find ourselves in a rabbit hole with unrelated to what we were originally reading. It's also important to give your eyes a break from the screen. 10 minutes for every 50 minutes you've been reading. Also, try to avoid the extra distractions such as games or social media. Okay, so you've prepared to read and you have finished reading. Now what? Now you have to remember what you've read. Here is the curve of forgetting, developed by a team at the University of Waterloo, which shows us how much information we can retain when doing periodic review and how reasonable the amount of time is that you need to commit to studying can be. The green line shows our retention rebounding with just a few minutes of studying over a course of a month. Without review, we lose almost all of what we learned from one class period. In this study, they asserted that at the end of a particular class period of 50 minutes, if you were paying attention the entire time, you leave knowing 100% of the information in that class. This can also apply to reading a chapter. Without any review, the next day, you've lost somewhere between 50 to 80% of what you've learned. But after a 10-minute review, you restore that knowledge. By day 7, without any review, you'd remember about 10 to 12% of what you learned. But the knowledge would be fully restored after a 5-minute review. By the end of the month, you'd be lucky to have a 2 to 3% recall. Yet, even just 2 to 4 minutes would bring you back to the level that you were on the very first day of the class in question. So, in summary, spending about 20 minutes total for a month reviewing the material will help restore your knowledge. This is referred to as spaced learning because it's spaced out over time. After you're done reading, it is so important to spend time checking your understanding when reviewing the material. Make sure you can adequately summarize what you've read and answer questions, either your own or from the book, to test yourself. Don't move on to the next thing if you're still struggling to remember, or you'll build a rocky foundation on which to learn more on later. Also, be patient with yourself. Many students struggle with reading and need time to adjust to college-level reading expectations. If you're struggling in a class, you can always go to the Learning Center for assistance. We hope you've learned some new ways in which you can improve your reading skills. Thank you so much for watching, and make sure you check out our website at learningcenter.unt.edu for more information, and follow us on social media to get the latest updates. Again, welcome to UNT and go Mean Green!